unions, civic organizations that come together around common issues in order to build power for change. I mean, that's really the short of it.
Especially in action. I think, faith without works is dead. And then equality of seeing that everyone has a seat at the table. And then also love. Without love, we won't be able to do anything, or nothing will be fruitful of what we do. And then benevolence is the kindness, just showing kindness in a mean world, I think speaks volume, as well as there are so many people that have it in their heart that they want to do something, but don't know how to do it, or where to do it, or how to get involved. And so right now, what Caleb is at the right moment is because we're just a reflection of allowing people to see that it can no longer happen on our watch. I think that the time of change is always now. There's never a period where we can wait for justice to come. We're going to have to make it come. I think that the time is right now because we have so many committed and dedicated people that have sacrificed their time to say, I want to be involved. Not just speak of what they want to do, but actually put their heart and their soul and their monies behind it. And I think that's what has helped us. When you have dedicated people, when you have committed people, when you have people that have found their passion, that's what has made the difference. We have been able to connect people that have found their passion. They have found their voice, and they are using it.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. We are so glad you're able to join us today. This is the Caleb Coalition's Economic Mobility Task Force Forum, the first candidate forum in a series that's going to go on for the next 2 weeks. And we are so thrilled to have candidate for mayor Monty Bruell with us this evening. Welcome, Monty.
Austin, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, just to give folks an idea of what we're in for tonight, we had our quick intro video to share a little bit about who Caleb is. And we're going to do a very shortened presentation of our Develop With Us campaign. It's a campaign that our task force launched just a few months ago, focused on accountability and transparency in city government. So we're going to give an abbreviated version of that presentation. For the full version, it's on our website, calebcha.org. We would love for y'all to check it out. But we wanted to at least be able to give a taste of that. And then after that, we're going to dive in. We have a few sort of preset questions that we're going to pose to Monty. And then there will be an opportunity for some Q&A. So as we're going through this presentation, if you have questions about accountability and transparency in city government, we would ask you, if you're on Zoom, to please go ahead and put those in the chat box. And we're going to have some folks sort of combing through those. And if you're on Facebook Live, put them in the comments section, and we're gonna watch for those as well. So with that, we're gonna dive into our abbreviated presentation. Again, my name is Austin Sauerbrei. I'm the co-chair for Caleb's Economic Mobility Task Force. And before we get going, I realize I need to share my screen so y'all can see the slides. So hold on just 1 minute. All right, let's see here. Okay, folks able to see that okay? All right. So who are we and what's this campaign all about? Well, again, we are the Caleb Coalition's Economic Mobility Task Force. We are members of community organizations, faith organizations, and labor organizations from across the city. And over a year ago, our committee really started to dive into the questions. Economic mobility is this huge, broad task. Economics is a huge issue. But what is something that both with our members and our neighbors, what were some of the really key questions that people were curious about? And what were some of the key issues that were impacting economic development in the city? And what were some of the areas that we could really make an impact in? So as we kind of dove into this, there's a lot to be said about the state of our economy. We know Chattanooga is booming. There's a lot of really great things happening in the city, but it's not booming for everyone. Economic growth has been great for some, but we know that the majority of Chattanoogans are still struggling to make ends meet. With just a quick look at the numbers, again, we're not going to go into super detail, but 12.9% of Chattanooga families live at or below the poverty threshold. That's almost 36% higher than the US average. In addition to that, Chattanoogans earn 17% less than the average American, and our income is growing 20% slower. Just one more stat to throw at you. In terms of wages, so real wages in Hamilton County, for an individual with one child, the MIT's wage calculator says that that person needs to be earning $22.63 an hour just to make ends meet. This is not living an extravagant lifestyle. This is not allotting for retirement or college savings. This is just getting by. For a single income family of 4, that person needs to be earning $24.18 per hour. And so as we began to talk to our members and talk to our neighbors and do outreach in the community, some of the things that consistently kept coming up and what we were hearing was that people were feeling left out of the big decisions that impact their lives. There's a lack of clarity about how decisions are made. We see development happening in our communities, but folks are wondering and not quite sure how that development was happening and really concerned that their voice wasn't being heard in the process of development. So I'm going to turn it over to Janice to share about our coalition and our task force values that came out of this process.
Thank you, Austin. As you can see, our values for good development and what it looks like is a good living wages. No one should have to work more than one full-time job to provide for themselves or their family. Our second value is community stability. Investment should increase opportunity and quality of life for low and moderate income families. Every Chattanoogan deserves secure housing and a safe, thriving community. Don't you agree? Equitable transit. When people have access to safe, affordable public transit, they are able to get to their jobs and training and education that provides pathways to economic sustainability. And so what do we want? We want transparency and accountability. We want transparency and a community voice in decisions involving public money that will impact our neighborhoods. And we want accountability, community-centered metrics that ensure that companies who get public resources are actually benefiting our people. And what we want, good development. Good development happens with us and not to us. Thank you, Austin.
Thanks, Janice. So as we kind of dove into this question specifically about development and decision makings, one area really came into focus, and that's corporate tax breaks and incentive deals. So we know that there's not a whole lot we can do right now for private development, but we do have something to say about the way our public money is used. And every year, there are companies that receive tax breaks from our city. They're receiving public incentives to build their buildings and do business. And so we had some questions. What's the real magnitude of tax breaks in terms of real dollars? How do tax breaks work? Who decides which companies receive a tax break? How do we make sure that these decisions actually improve our health, wages, financial security, and life circumstances? And most importantly, where do you and I fit into that? So just last year, the amount of corporate property taxes that were forgiven or written off by the city of Chattanooga and Hamilton County totaled over $25 million. And typically these tax agreements last between 10 and 30 years. If collected, these taxes could be used to fund things like infrastructure, public safety, parks, libraries, so on and so forth. And so we have real questions, not that tax incentive deals are necessarily bad. In fact, sometimes they're very needed, but we have questions about them. So it turns out with that $25 million that was given out in tax breaks last year, over 90% of these were given through a type of tax breaks called the jobs pilot. So what's a jobs pilot? Pilot stands for payment in lieu of taxes. Basically, it's an agreement between the city and a company that provides the company with a property tax break for a period of up to 30 years. And typically, these are used to help attract new development and new companies to the city. But again, these incentives aren't necessarily bad, but we want to know, do these tax breaks actually create real benefit for our communities? Is it worth what we would lose in property tax revenue? And would the company locate here anyway? Do they even need the incentive in the first place? So, what's the current process for giving out jobs pilots, and does it answer these questions? I'm gonna turn it over to Brandon to walk us through the process.
Thank you so much, Austin. So for some people in the chat, this may be review, but a lot of people just do not know the process of the jobs pilot. So to begin, the city hires the Chamber of Commerce to recruit businesses to Chattanooga. And then those businesses complete an application for a jobs pilot. From there, the chamber then reviews the application. So where do we fit in? Well, unfortunately, there are no publicly adopted criteria for jobs pilots and how those are agreed upon. So no required public hearings or staff report. So from that point, the city's Industrial Development Board conducts a final review of the jobs pilot application. The IDB takes ownership of the land, equipment, buildings, and so on and so forth. And then from there, the company leases assets from the IDB for a small amount, usually $1. So do these agreements actually benefit our communities? And that's sort of what this entire presentation is about.
As you can see, there's in this map, just at a quick glance, and I'll maybe point to Helen real quick to share a little bit about this map. This gives a sense of scope and scale of tax breaks in the city. Oh, you're on mute, Helen.
Finally remembered to mute and I forgot to get off. So what this shows in color are the properties in the city of Chattanooga that have some sort of tax favored status. And the yellow that you see are government owned properties, local, city, county, federal. And then some of the orange you see are like hospitals and private schools and things like that that have some degree of tax advantage. The red, and this needs to be updated, on the bottom left, you see the Black Creek TIF, Tax Increment Financing District, bottom left. And then we also need to add, there is now a TIF at the end of MLK, and as you all know, the Tubman site was recently added as a TIF, so we now have 3 TIFs. What you see in green are the pilots, and like on the right, in the upper sort of right-hand corner, the big green is Volkswagen. And so anyway, I think the point that this makes is that we really need to be careful. We've got a lot of properties that aren't paying property taxes already, have some degree of tax favored status. So I think that makes it incumbent on us. We can't change what we've done in the past, and some of what we've done in the past makes sense. But I think as the message to us is we need to be really careful in the future about adding more color to that map.
Awesome, thank you, Helen. And then as a last point before we get into our conversation with Monty, Jessica's just gonna really briefly highlight some of the barriers to accountability and transparency that came from our research.
Yes, thank you. So yeah, the first is the murkiness of the process of choosing these pilots in the first place. It takes place between the mayor's office, the chamber, and the business in question. and we feel like this process needs to be opened up in very public ways. Public needs to have a chance to learn about it and to have a seat at the table in deciding which pilots are going to be given out and to what companies for what benefit. The second barrier is that we currently have pretty much a rubber stamp culture in the boards and the city council. Usually the mayor is and the chamber are applying a lot of pressure to get this project approved as quickly as possible, and that closes that window for transparency, and it puts council members in a bind because of all the political pressure on them to approve it. So we need to move away from that. The mayor obviously is the only elected advocate for the people in the in this triumvirate of the chamber, the business, and the mayor. So we hope that any mayoral candidates will work to open this up a little bit. Finally, we've been suffering from a narrow vision of our economic planning that doesn't look at long-term impacts, doesn't meet long-term goals, while still locking us into these long-term agreements. So we are hoping that elected candidates will put forward a comprehensive plan that fits these pilots into a plan to get Chattanooga's wages up to where they match the real estate market, where they match the growth in living expenses. And if we can put it into a long-term plan, then it's easier to understand why we're making this or that pilot, and the whole process becomes something that the whole city can get behind, rather than just the people whom it directly benefits.
Awesome. Thanks so much for everyone chiming in on that. Again, this was a very brief, condensed version of the full detailed presentation. But with that, we're going to get into some specific questions to Monty. So to start, we're going to go to Ms. Janice Gooden, who's going to have our first question for us. Oh, Ms. Janice, I think you're still on mute. You able to get it? Okay. Well, there you. Okay. Well, I'll just go ahead and read the question for you. It is okay. So Janice's question was, what is one concrete thing that you plan to address economic mobility in Chattanooga, and why? So one concrete plan to address economic mobility, and why is that your priority area?
Well, thank you, Austin. The number one reason that I want to be mayor of Chattanooga is to address the huge disparities in income and wealth that exist in our community. If we go all the way back to 1997, we would find that the average African-American household earned about 62% of what the average white household earned. So here we are in 2021, and this is a pre-COVID number. After all of this progress, after being the best outdoor city ever, America's most livable mid-sized city, the best place to start a business, after all this progress, now the average African-American family earns half what the average white household earns. We can't take much more of this progress. It's working for some people, but it is actually killing people in our community. So I'm running for mayor because I want our citizens, I want voters to reject the same old, reject the affluent white man who says he has everybody's best interest at heart, and quit being Charlie Brown who thinks Lucy's gonna let them kick the football. Lucy's not going to let you kick the football. So we've got to do something that is really, really drastic and bold. And I'll say this last thing, and we can go to the next question. When you look at households in poverty in Chattanooga, 2/3 of them are headed by single women. And we've not put a dent in poverty because we haven't had a mayor who was willing to stand up in public, raise his hand and say, I will be the champion for single mothers, their children, and families, because that's where the poverty is. I mean, if you look at your own bail fund research, you look at the people who are incarcerated in Hamilton County on pretrial detention, half of the people are, but when you look at just women, I think that number is over 70%. And the reason that that number is so high is that women are much poorer than men. And if men can't afford bail, women certainly can't afford bail. So we've got to do something to lift up single mothers, their kids, and their families. And we're going to attack poverty. The Bruell administration is going to wage a war on poverty.
Thanks for that. All right. So the next question comes from Ms. Janice Walwyn.
Well, hello again, Monty.
Janice, you're everywhere.
Oh, as we've researched and talked to a variety of stakeholders about our current processes for granting tax incentives, we were surprised by the lack of information provided to both the public and key decision makers. Were there specific items in our Develop With Us presentation that you were surprised to learn as well?
Well, Janice, I wish that I could say that I was surprised, but I've been studying our government for a long time. I've been talking to people like my good friend Helen Burns Sharp, and I got to tell you, I wasn't surprised. Our city gives out tax incentives, chiefly in the form of pilots, like they're handing out candy at Halloween. And there's no rhyme or reason to it. And I have asked elected officials, I said, why do you do this? Why can't there be transparency? And they say, well, we don't want to have hard and fast criteria because then that would take away some of our flexibility. Well, yes, that is exactly what we want to do. We want to take away some of your flexibility because that flexibility is crazy. You know, when we talk to people and we talk to these companies and developers or who have you, you know, there's a test called the but-for test that other cities apply. And that is simply, this project would not get done but for this particular pilot or incentive. We don't need to give incentives to people who are going to do it anyway. I was at a city council meeting and a developer came up to a council person after the meeting and said, thanks so much for the pilot. We didn't really need it, but it's just a little something extra for us. Our investors will appreciate it. It's not supposed to be a little something extra. That's not the purpose of it. We have to rein this in, and that's my commitment. But you asked me, Janice, if I was surprised. I was not surprised in the least bit because this is done out in the open. It's been going on for a long time, and it needs to stop.
Thank you.
Awesome. I think you kind of started hitting on the next question, but we've got a question from Brandon Denny.
All right, thank you so much, Monty. Yeah, so you hit it a little bit, yeah, and specifically, so earlier we were talking about the jobs pilots. What specifically, how do you plan on working towards accountability and transparency in development, particularly around these jobs pilots and TIF deals?
Well, I think there are a couple of things that we need to do primarily. First of all, we need to develop public criteria to evaluate every pilot application. It shouldn't be a mystery how these applications are being decided upon. It should be something that any person could look at the set of criteria and say, okay, this meets the criteria or it doesn't meet the criteria. The next thing we need to do is look at the composition of the Industrial Development Board. I think that we go to the same well over and over again. We think that the only people qualified to be on the IDB and other kinds of boards are downtown business people. Well, we all have a stake in this community. I think that we should look at putting, community activists, neighborhood association presidents, and other leaders in our city on these boards. It doesn't have to just be the downtown business people calling the shots. And then finally, I would be in favor of adding a citizen review board. I'd have to take a look at exactly where in the process that it would make sense to do that. But I think that, by the time by the time every pilot application gets to the city council, it's almost too late. The train has kind of left the station at that point. And so, Brandon, I really think that we need to have a little more citizen input. And it may slow the process just a little bit, but I want to get it right. I don't care about doing it quickly. I want to do it the right way, and we shouldn't be afraid to be transparent. Transparency and accountability, they are the cornerstones of good government.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Monty.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we're starting to get some great questions here in the chat. So I'll start with one from Talitha McJunkin, and she wanted me to read this question out loud. She says, how will Monty address rubber stamp culture in Chattanooga?
Well, Talitha, as I said, I think that the very first thing we have to do is we have to have transparent and public criteria. Every application that is submitted to the city couldn't possibly pass the but-for test. We don't need to, as I said, pass out pilots like they're candy at Halloween. So transparency and having a hard and fast set of criteria, I think, is the way to go. Now, can we make exceptions? Yes, we can make exceptions, but then we have to stand up in the public square and we have to say, we are making an exception and these are the reasons for the exception. Currently, there's no accountability in that area. And then the last thing, Talitha, is I think that when we start getting different kinds of people, not just downtown business people evaluating the applications, I think that will take away the rubber stamp. I think a little scrutiny will be good for the process.
Great. Well, we've got another great question from Jared Story. Says, Monty, you've talked about convening the mayors of all the major cities in Tennessee to push back against state preemption that keeps us from enacting progressive legislation that could bring more accountability around tax incentives and other progressive measures. Do you foresee a coalition like that mounting a legal challenge alongside grassroots activism?
Well, if we're talking about the preemption of the state legislature, the answer is absolutely yes. It's really funny because sometimes I talk to groups and a few of my opponents even, they will point out to me, they'll say, Monty, well, what you're proposing, you don't have the authority to do. That requires the state legislature. And I want to say, well, again, that is my point. I think the state legislature has overreached its constitutional authority. And the first thing that I want to do is I want to form a coalition of the mayors of Memphis, Nashville, Knoxville, along with, of course, myself as the mayor of Chattanooga. And we want to use our leverage because those 4 cities hold 65% of the state's population. I think that we can be very persuasive with the state legislature, and I have been crystal clear in what I'm about to say next. I will go either with these other 3 mayors, or I will go alone to the courthouse, and I will file suit against the state of Tennessee to keep them in check and to curb the preemption that currently exists. The form of government we have now with the city council, we didn't get that because it was given. We got it because people sued. And just because something exists the way it is today, if it is wrong, if it is unfair, if it is unjust, it doesn't mean that we can't change it. In fact, we have a responsibility to change it. And so as mayor, yes, I am prepared to go to the courthouse and file suit against the state of Tennessee to curb the unconstitutional overreach of the state legislature.
Awesome, thank you. All right, and we do have a question from Keisha Strickland that's, it's I think in a way related, but she asked about, and I know we'll need to hold you to time on this one, but asks about, do you have plans for affordable housing development, particularly in diverse areas?
Wow. So I think this is one of the areas where a TIF, tax increment financing district, a TIF would be a great tool to use. I was really disappointed in the kind of TIF that was used for the Harriet Tubman site to pay for the recruitment of Nippon Paint, because that particular kind of TIF can only be used to make improvements to that site. I was in favor of expanding the borders to include parts of the neighborhood so that we could use some of the proceeds from the TIF to make improvements to the East Chattanooga neighborhoods that are adjacent to the Harriet Tubman site. It seemed like that whole deal was rushed a bit, and I think if they'd been a little more thoughtful, they could have done a better job. If we look at South Chattanooga, Alton Park, Piney Woods, there are acres and acres and acres of undeveloped land. And it's primarily undeveloped because there are brownfield issues. There are toxins in the soil there. I lived in Alton Park as a little boy, and I had asthma, and I can remember smelling the fumes from Velsicol and the other chemical plants that were out there. But I want to create a TIF in that area so that we can use proceeds for brownfield cleanup. We can build affordable housing. We can build healthcare facilities, and we can use the TIF to create economic development opportunities. I think that is where the tool should be used. It doesn't necessarily need to just be used at the high end of the scale in areas like Black Creek.
Awesome, thank you for that. Well, on a related note, we got about 2 more questions. Joe Payton, do you have a question?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Monte, for taking questions. My question is, do you believe Chattanooga's practice, long-standing practice here in recent years, of public and private partnerships is going to be good enough and sufficient enough to make the investments we need for Chattanoogans across the board to be prepared and successful in a highly interconnected and competitive global economy?
I've got 2 parts for my answer here. First, let me just say that I think that public-private partnerships can be a good thing. I am not philosophically opposed to those kinds of arrangements. What I would want the city of Chattanooga to do is to require the private entities to follow the same regulations and guidelines, particularly around disclosure, that the city of Chattanooga has to do. So, for example, if we give, $1.5 million to the Chamber of Commerce, and that's about what we contribute to the Chamber every year, then the Chamber should be required to have diversity in hiring. They should be required to let the public know about job opportunities related to the public funding that they're getting. One of the things that irks me about Chattanooga is that I often hear that someone has gotten a job and I didn't even know that there was an opening. And that's kind of how we work. It's you got to know somebody, and if you don't know somebody, then you don't have a chance. And I think that we should ask the entities that we fund as taxpayers to be as transparent as the city, to be as inclusive as the city, and quite frankly, I think that we ought to take a look at partnerships where organizations don't have diverse boards and diverse staffs, because it's just not right. The taxpayers deserve transparency and they deserve inclusion, and I think that public-private partnerships sometimes are used as a way to get around those things. Relative to using those partnerships to create opportunity, I think that in the case of, say, CNE around affordable housing, Arts Build with the arts, I think that those are great organizations, and I think that a lot of opportunity can be created there. I will say, though, that in general, I am not in favor of the privatization of public space and public services. So when I look at something like the Business Improvement District, I don't really see that as creating opportunity for all. I see that as a land grab, a power grab, and it's an admission of failure on the part of the city. Why do we need to create a private entity to basically, provide services to downtown that the city is capable of providing and should provide? And it created a double taxation for the small businesses inside the Business Improvement District. So that's an example of a private entity, and I don't know if it would be public-private. I think that's just all private, of an organization where I don't even know why we even needed it. And I think the city just dropped the ball on that.
Great. All right. We've got time for one more question, and then we sort of got a closing call to action. And we got a final question from Kelsey McBride, and that's she says, Monty, could you talk a little bit about your work with the Atlanta Beltline TIF District?
Sure. Before I answer that question, I want to say, Caleb is one of my favorite organizations in Chattanooga. You do great work. I am so proud to occasionally get to attend your meetings, and I'm grateful that you let me do that. I know that Caleb can't endorse me as a candidate, but as a candidate, I want you to know that I endorse Caleb. I will always stand up for you, and I will always partner with you. And I look forward to working with each of your programs and all of the organizations and people involved if I am fortunate enough to be mayor of Chattanooga. So I just want to say that because you guys are really great. I have been, so before I moved back to Chattanooga 10 years ago, I lived in Atlanta. And I was the vice chairman of the Atlanta Beltline Tax Allocation District. And that's one of the largest TIFs in the South. It's $1 billion TIF. And the purpose of the Atlanta Beltline Tax Allocation District was to provide incentives to promote affordable housing and economic development along the 23 miles of the Atlanta Beltline. It was very successful. Well, some people might say it was not very successful, but it was successful. And here's what I love about the way it was set up. The Atlanta Beltline TIF took out all of the best development parcels that were along the 23 miles of the Beltline. And they put them aside. And they said to developers, if you want to have these choice parcels, you've got to develop some of the other stuff first. You've got to go and prove your dedication. You've got to contribute to the public good by developing these, not as desirable parcels. And then once you've done that, we will let you develop the things that you really want to develop. And that prevented developers from cherry picking the things they wanted to do. There are a lot of examples across the United States where TIFs have allowed developers to just do the good stuff first. And as a result, the other stuff never got done. And I think that one of the great things about my work with the Atlanta Beltline and that tax allocation district is that we got a lot done. And it was not just doing the shiny, fancy, profitable stuff, but we created a lot of opportunity for a lot of people by spreading the development around the entire 23 miles of the Beltline.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And I said that was the last question, but we've had a few more rolling through Facebook. So we got one more.
Okay.
But, and then there will be a time for a closing statement as well. But if we could try to limit the answer to 2 minutes if possible. The question is, if elected mayor, what strategic plans will you develop to ensure economic development projects are inclusive with regards to mixed development, affordable housing, affordable early development, childhood development, schools, etc.?
2 minutes, really?
Yeah.
Well, I think what I would say to that is, as mayor, I want to establish preferences for our own local companies, and I want to establish preferences for minority and women-owned companies as well. If you look at Enterprise South, 35% of the workers there don't even live in Hamilton County. So our taxpayers are subsidizing the employment of people from North Georgia, Bradley County, Meigs County, and other places. We've got to do a better job of taking care of taxpayers when we make those agreements. We just had, and when I say we, the city of Chattanooga just had a disparity study done that shows how little business not only minority companies get from the city of Chattanooga, but women-owned companies. And so we've got to do a better job there. And I think there's some great examples. I mean, we can look just down the street in Atlanta at how much wealth the city of Atlanta created for the minority communities and for women in Atlanta. So I would look to do those things as mayor of Chattanooga. This is an area where the state legislature won't be happy. This is an area where the governor is going to give some pushback, but we need a mayor who is not afraid to stand up to those entities. And as I like to say, you can't speak truth to power if you don't speak truth to the people. And that's really the basis of how I'm going to conduct myself in office and why I want to be mayor.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. Well, as our final closing piece, with sort of one of the things that we are very clear about as Caleb with these conversations is we want some form of commitment from candidates about what they will commit to do. So we've sent you 4 questions ahead of time. We know you've read these questions, you've seen these questions, but we're going to ask each of these commitment questions one by one. And if you could, just a short yes or no answer. If you have a short comment, that's okay, but we're trying to get yes or no answers to these. So the first one, will you commit to develop and implement clear, enforceable, and publicly accessible criteria for the jobs pilot program?
Yes.
Right. Will you help ensure that city council, relevant boards, and the general public have thorough written information outlining exactly how proposed tax breaks will benefit the public? And will you ensure that this information is provided well ahead of any vote on a pilot, TIF, or other forms of public incentive?
Yes, Helen, I will do that.
Ask number 3. Will you support an effort to require relevant boards and city council to hold public hearings for respective pilot agreements?
Yes.
And lastly, will you work with Caleb to help identify and set clear expectations for appointees to the Industrial Development Board and the HEB Board?
Absolutely. Yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And we're going to give you the last word, Monty, if you have any closing statements, and then we'll log out.
Well, thank you for this opportunity. As I've said, I'm a big fan of Caleb, and I hope that I have the opportunity to work with you as the next mayor of Chattanooga. I just want to say that it's time for the average, everyday Chattanoogan to stand up and take back their power. We know what it's like to live in a city that's run from the top down, but wouldn't it be great to have a city where we're collaborative, where we're inclusive, and it's not just lip service. I'm tired of, as I said before, being Charlie Brown, hoping that Lucy will let me kick the football. I don't believe it's going to happen because it's never happened before. We need to take back that power. So our city is like, someone in a jail cell. We've been, locked down, locked up, but the jailer has left the keys on a stool within easy reach. And those keys are our power to vote. Only 19,000 people voted in the last city election out of 103,000 registered voters. Andy Burke was elected mayor with just 11,000 votes. That shouldn't be. And so I'm just asking everybody on this call, every voter who hears me, take back your power. Let's go to the polls. Let's do something different. Let's bring bold change to Chattanooga. And I think that I can bring that change. So I ask you to vote for me, Monty Bruell, for mayor of Chattanooga. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you again so much, Monty, for being on with us. And one final thing, we also haven't asked for everyone else that's on this call, not just the candidates. And that's two things. Number one, if you check out our website, if someone's able to put the link in the chat, it's calebcha.org/develop-with-us. It has all the information about our campaign in a way that you can plug in and sign up and get involved. We need you. We love you. We need you to be involved with this project if we're going to actually hold elected officials accountable to us. So I want you to get involved. The second is we're going to have more of these candidate forums. So this week is focused on the mayoral candidates. And so we have on the agenda on Wednesday at 7 p.m., we're going to be doing a forum with Tim Kelly. And then on Thursday at 1 p.m. with Kim White. And then on Friday at 7 p.m. with Wade Hinton. So if you're curious about how some of the other candidates respond to these questions, please join. And then next week, we're going to have a series with the council members. We're going to group those council members in groups of 4 and 5, and we'll have details about the dates for those forums shortly. So thank you all so much for being on. Monty, thank you so much for your time, and we will see you all shortly.
Thank you very much.